Hello, it is Kim Howerton, and welcome to my live today. We're on Facebook and YouTube. And so, wherever you're tuning in from, thank you for joining me. It is Tuesday afternoon here in California, and I am glad to be with you talking about whatever you want to talk about. So, I'm here to answer your questions. I'm currently drinking, well, I've got two beverages. One is some iced tea that has been de-iced at this point. There was ice, it melted, and some coffee that I haven't finished from the afternoon. So we'll see. I might sip from one or the other. You never know. But I am glad to be joining you today. And what's been going on? Well, mostly just writing, working on things, trying to be an organized human, which is challenging for me. I think I've talked about this before, but in my previous history, there was so in my previous history, I was a closet designer for quite some time, and I was also a personal organizer at various points. And one of the things that I always like to say about that experience was, I am best at teaching and most drawn to things that I'm not naturally good at. So my career makes sense. My first job out of college or in college, while I was still in college, was I would teach people how to take the SAT and various standardized tests. And I was kind of terrible at that job. I mean, like I did fine. I was acceptable, but it was not something that I was like naturally suited towards, because if somebody were to have, I mean, I could follow a lesson plan. I was working for one of those organizations, right? But they recruited people based on their SAT scores, right? If you did well on the SAT, they wanted you to be one of their teachers, which I think is a horrible way to find teachers, because what ended up happening was, if you had asked me without following a lesson plan, how do you get better at taking the SAT? I would have been like, okay, here's what you do. You read the question, then you read the answers. And as you read the answers, one of them will seem more correct than the others. And pick that one and then move on to the next question, which is not that helpful information for somebody who does not know what the right answer is, or like have a strong feeling about which one of the answers is correct, right? So my advice was terrible, because I didn't struggle here, right? It wasn't my problem. And then, yeah, I could follow somebody else's information and transmit that information, but I didn't really understand it, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I was not the client, right? And then, but I started doing professional organizing and closet design because I have a little bit of disorder in my way. I like order, I like organization, I love the concepts, but like left to my own devices, I will sort of let things pile up, and I have to work at being organized. I have to have systems, stick with my systems, be reminded of my systems, right? I have to work at it. So I actually feel very proficient in teaching people how to be organized, right? And then the same thing has happened with weight loss stuff, right? I'm very, like, my natural inclinations will not lead me to a reasonably thin or healthy body. Just nope. I am not so inclined. Like, my boyfriend is. He doesn't have to put any effort in being either in shape, thin, fit, like all of that. He is just on it, right? Because he loves exercise, and he doesn't love feeling very full. He naturally, it changes his eating pattern based on how he feels, like physically, like, oh, I ate something afterwards, I felt kind of heavy, it gave me a little bit of a stomach ache. I'm not eating that, right? And that's not my natural inclination. And so I have to work at these things to maintain even a modicum of a little bit of a semblance of a healthy body, right? And so I feel uniquely suited towards teaching these kind of topics, because I had to learn how to do it. It wasn't just, it came naturally to me. Quite honestly, he is crappy if he had at telling people what to do, because he's talked about it. He's been like, yeah, I can't teach people this because it just doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you do that? Why would you have to do that? All right. And so, yeah, I don't know how I even started talking about this, but okay. Oh, I was having to get some things organized today. So yeah, so that's what I've got. I do though have a deep love of buying things that I think will make me organized, like or buying notebooks. I love those, like, really cool paper stores, and you've got, like, I've got my serious preferences about what kind of binders I like, and so I love supplies, but I don't always execute well. Anyway, hey Jacqueline, hey Amy, good to have you here. If anybody has any questions, I will stop rambling when you ask them. Well, I'll still ramble, but on a more appropriate topic, and we can go from there. So you let me know what you want me to talk about. We're about 9 days out from me heading off to no 9 something, yeah, about 9 days out from me heading off to Las Vegas for a couple days to work on to be part of the experience that's going to be Dave Feldman's conference. That's the word I was looking for. Conference, which is going to talk a lot about lean mass hyperresponders and related topics. It's going to be awesome. Filet asked, what are your thoughts about alternate day fasting? So ADF, or alternate day fasting, is the idea that you would eat on alternate days. Different practitioners do it in different ways, from what I can understand a little bit. Like, do you go like dinner to dinner, or do you go like dinner to lunch, or things like that? But the general overarching rule is going to be that maybe like you eat on Monday, you don't eat on Tuesday. You eat on Wednesday, you don't eat on Thursday, right? Back and forth. And some people do a variation called like the 5 and 2, where you eat 5 days a week, you don't eat 2 days. I think, what are my thoughts? I'm like, what are my thoughts? I think that here's my overall thought about fasting. If you are someone with an enormous amount of excess body fat, enormous is probably a little hyperbole. If you are somebody who is like more than 50% body fat, right? That would be like you weigh 300 pounds, maybe you weigh 300 pounds and you have less than 150 pounds of lean mass. That kind of body composition. If you have plenty of body fat, I am really not that concerned with doing anything like alternate day fasting, or even up to a 3-day fast, if you have all the boxes checked in terms of you not having any things that would counter that as being a good idea, right? But as we start to decrease in body fat, as we get closer to sort of that overweight category, as opposed to the obese category, and not even just slightly obese, but like, I don't know if you guys know this, that there's a scale of obesity, and it starts at like, and it's generally based on BMI, though I don't think BMI is the end all be all, but in the obesity level, I think it's useful. You would know if you're a bodybuilder who has if you're super muscular, that it doesn't apply to you, right? But if you're like, I am a sedentary middle-aged woman who doesn't lift weights, it's like probably applies to you. So I don't think it's a great metric in many ways, but it is the sort of classification scale. So sort of like a BMI over 30 is overweight, but it goes up, right? Like, 30 to 35 is class 1, I believe, and 35 to 40 is class 2. I might have those cutoffs a little wrong, but it keeps going up. So if you're above even a class 1, I'd certainly say, I'm not super concerned, as long as you don't have any contraindications, right? One of the contraindications that I would find is, do you feel crappy when you fast? If you don't feel good when you fast, don't fast. I mean, you try, make sure you're getting electrolytes and all that stuff. But I would say no one needs to fast. I mean, no one needs to do long fasts for sure. And so if you feel crappy during your fast. That to me is a contraindication. But if you're like, I love it, I feel great, it's wonderful, and you have a lot of body fat, I don't have any real concerns about it. If as you start to graduate down into being leaner, like less of your body fat, less of your composition is body fat, it becomes riskier from a muscle perspective. So that's my answer. I feel it's very context dependent. For a person with a lot of body fat, for a person with a moderate amount of body fat, meh. For a person with not much body fat, no, bad news, right? So it's kind of a graduated scale. Why is that? It's really about the loss of lean mass. It's about the loss of muscle mass. And so when we get to someone who is, more in that overweight but not obese category, which I would say a lot of middle-aged women, as an example, and not only, but I'm just kind of like as a percentage, are in that category. And one of the things that begins to happen as we get older is it is harder and harder for our body to maintain and increase its muscle mass, right? So when we're super young, we have all these hormones coursing through our body trying to get us to grow, right? And so like you can breathe on a teenage boy and he adds some muscle mass, right? It's just absorbed through the air, right? He's got all of these hormones. And young women also, it's much easier for them to put on muscle mass. But as we start to kind of round out 30, those hormones get down regulated and they keep getting worse as we get older and older. And so gets to a point where it's very hard for us to put back on muscle mass. And what happens when we lose weight, when we lose mass to our body, we lose a percentage of it from body fat and we lose a percentage of it from lean mass. When we're very obese, the percentages are very skewed towards body fat. Our body is like, we got a lot of it. It's like a fire sale, it's got to go, right? You got so much body fat, it's not going to draw too much from your lean mass. But as that starts to tip, as you start to have less and less extra body fat, now it's going to prioritize less fat. You just have less, and it starts to go after more of your lean mass as you lose weight. And many studies have shown that this is what happens. So like kind of, that overweight category, you might lose a third of your weight from lean mass unless you do certain things to protect it, one of which is eating sufficient protein in your diet. And so that's where I start to really worry about a lot of fasting. Like one day a week, meh. You're probably filling in, the rest of the time just fine. But 50% of your week, I'm starting to get concerned, especially if you're in that not so obese category. So hopefully that answered the question about how I feel. It's very context dependent for sure. Oh, what's the other thing you can do to maintain as much lean body mass as possible? You need to lift weights. You need to resistance train. That can include things like Pilates and the kind of yoga where you're doing a lot of like things that are you're resisting against gravity, right? It doesn't have to be like hardcore pumping iron. It can be, exercise bands and things like that, but you have to challenge your muscles to keep them on. Protein alone won't do it. It'll help, but it won't do it alone. But so if the leaner you are and the more you want to fast, the more you have to lift weights. Everybody's got to do some resistance training. I'm not saying that that's not true. But it becomes more and more essential the leaner you are. And at a certain point, it's just not good enough. So that's a place where I would say, where do I fall on the spectrum of fasting fans? I think what I just said probably puts me like low, right? I'm not it's always a great person. I would say it really, really depends on the context. And do I think it has its place for some people who enjoy fasting? Absolutely. Do I think it's required for all people? Absolutely not. Do I see people get into trouble with it? Yes, I do. Do I see it being something that some people say changed their life? I also do. So it really depends on the context and the execution. So hopefully that answers the question. David says, I've been catching up on your podcast. They're great. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I do. I do. All right. Filet, 5 foot, 110 pounds, maintenance, 1,100 calories. Oh, geez. Yeah, no. Like, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not a doctor. If you were my client, I would say, dear God, no. Yeah, quite honestly. And I would wonder about those maintenance calories. They seem a bit low. And I would potentially want to look into why those are your maintenance calories and see if we can do anything about bumping them up. Like looking at what your activity level is, looking at perhaps there's a reverse diet need to try and bump those calories up a little bit. I know you're not a very big person, so I'm not saying that it's crazy out of the spectrum of what your maintenance calories might be, but I would hope that we could bump those up a bit. You say, I was wondering if it's a bit better to be hungry every other day than hungry all the time. Yeah, that's terrible. No, neither. Neither is my answer. You shouldn't be hungry all the time. So what I would say there is I would do some serious investigation and look at what's going on there and try and see what we can do about it. It sounds like maybe you've lost some weight along the way. And one of the things that happens on a weight loss journey is we often there's something called metabolic adaptation. And metabolic adaptation is when we train our body to exist on a caloric intake that is smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, some people refer to this as like metabolic damage. I don't like to refer to it as metabolic damage because it is not irreversible. It's not damage. Like you haven't broken the vessel, right? It's how bodies are designed. The only reason that someone eats as little as some people do, and as you are, right, is like there's your body thinks there's a famine. Your body's like, we don't know what's happening here, but clearly there's no food for people to eat, or this person would be eating more. And so your metabolism downregulates. So that would do things like suppress your T3. That would do things like reduce your energy needs of your body through like various hormones and also through, well, T3 is a hormone, and also probably affect how energetic you are and how much activity you naturally feel inclined to do, how much fidgeting you do, how's your sleep, all these things start to change based on not eating a lot for a long period of time. And what that does is that does lower your maintenance calories. And so one of the things that I like to use with people is a reverse diet, which is a period of time where they start to increase their calories slowly so as not to like freak out their body and put on a ton of weight, but just a little bit at a time and a little bit at a time over a long period of time, while simultaneously trying to increase your resistance training and your activity levels to try and keep that balance. So things are your caloric intake can go up without additional or much additional fat being put on your body. So I would say, you're at a level where it's really hard for you to get in even enough nutrients so that you're not nutrient deficient or malnourished. So I would look into reverse dieting. Robert Sykes is a good person on that. I've done a little bit on that on my podcast and various discussions, but it's really, it's basic form. It's trying to be a little more active, do a little more resistance training while simultaneously increasing your caloric intake so that it's going above your current or your previous maintenance calories into a higher one. I just think you're in a lose-lose right now, and we're trying to turn at least into like a neutral territory. So I would certainly not start alternate day fasting. It's going to make the problem worse. For you, it's going to lower your metabolic rate even more than what's happened now. So I would do things to try and reverse that trend at this point. The biggest thing I notice, like some people will tell me, well, I'm eating 1,000 calories a day, but I'm not really that hungry. That's one circumstance, but you're hungry. And if you're truly hungry, which I can understand why, then it's something we need to address, because no one can exist the rest of their life being very hungry all the time. So neither one is a good alternative. I would pick door number 3. Okay. All right. David asks, is there a recommended amount of iodine to take daily? Well, it kind of depends how much iodine you might be getting in your diet overall. But my sort of guide is that I take 2 drops of Lugol's 2% iodine solution a day. I don't know what that translates into exactly in milligrams or micrograms, but that seems to keep me at an appropriate level. That's the advice that Dr. Barry had given me and many people. And it seems to be doing super well for me. There are people that debate that maybe we might need more. But I certainly don't think we need less than that. And that's kind of covering my needs. Now, if I were like somebody that ate shellfish several times a week, if my favorite snack was dried seaweed, I might not need to take any iodine, right? Because I would be getting it from my food sources. But I happen to be someone that doesn't get it from their food sources because I like neither seafood nor nori, right? Seaweed. So nor nori. So I don't get much. If I get, you get a little bit from other food sources, but those are the heavyweights. Okay, so you say 12.5 per drop in, I believe that's milligrams. It might be micrograms. So that's what I think too. I have not done a deep dive into higher doses myself. I haven't found the need to do so, but there are people that talk about that, and so you can always do some research there. But I do not. I am not in that camp at this time in thinking that is useful. Hey, Paula, it's good to see you. I'll see you in Vegas, right? Okay. So what else might we talk about today? I'm still reading this book. I'm reading it so much, I have put my little sticky notes. So I have these little sticky notes that I like. They're just little tabs. And I have taped it to the book so that I may pull my little indicator and put it in my little book when I find a section that I think is of especially good information. Anyway, David said, have I finished my exercise certification? Oh, that's a great question, David. I took the whole course and then I didn't do the certification exam. So no, I just was like, where is my attention and energy going? The exam was pretty extensive, so I am going to tell on myself and say, well, I don't actually think that I'm going to be doing any personal training, so I didn't take the exam. It was not a simple exam to take. It involved like a lot of videos to record, and I have excuses. Would you like more? But I kind of backburnered that for some other things that I've been working on. But at some point I might. A good friend of mine, Lisa, though, has taken and passed hers. So I might be doing some stuff with her in the future. So we in the future, there are exercise modules in Keto Unstuck. Up to this point, there have been some limited stuff. There is definitely information on, what we need to do as a human to be more active. But quite honestly, we have to walk before we run. And most of the people in Keto Unstuck, as it stands, really just needed help with getting more steps in the day and being encouraged to start a lifting routine or a resistance training routine more than detailed. You got to walk before you can run. And a lot of these people just needed to stop doing a few things before they moved on. So, oh, yes, David, I think I do remember that. So good to see you. And the class is always evolving. But at this point, what it's really been focused on for a lot of people is turning around their habits around behaviors that are not serving them in terms of fat loss. Thanks, David. I'm glad that you learned a lot. I hope you're doing exceptionally well at this point. What else is going on here? Thinking, I'm like looking at my desk for something to talk about. Gosh, yeah. So I think I've said this before, but this book is about the Women's Health Initiative and and basically what happened in the 90s and 2000s that really screwed up women's understanding of hormonal replacement therapy and the bad information that got out in the world about it. And so it reads a little bit like a whodunit, not a whodunit, but like we know whodunit. But like it's a good read. So I've been enjoying that. And today I was writing about heart disease. Indeed, heart disease was the thing that I was writing about today. Cardiovascular issues. And I've been doing more looking at the risk factors. And one of the points that I'm looking at and talking about in the book is there's sort of reductionism. What is reductionism, right? Like reducing big ideas to small points, right? And one of the things is, like, I'll just tell you, like, I have a client who was talking to the other day about her LDL being high, but all these other things have improved in her life, right? She's lost a ton of weight. She's super cardiovascularly fit. She's just doing amazing. And yet her doctor is convinced, right, that, and maybe not just her, but so this, now it's not just, it's a lot of people telling me this story, right? That their doctor is convinced they're going to drop over dead of a heart attack just because their LDL is high. Well, everything else has gotten better. And one of the things that I really think, so, and when you look at, how much does LDL matter? Does LDL matter? Which is a big debate, right? In the keto world and the low carb world and just the world in general. Even if you believe that LDL matters, even if you believe that LDL is causal in heart disease, even if you believe all these things that many people don't believe, but even if you did, even if you believed all of that, you still have to put it in a risk calculator. It's not just like high LDL equals heart disease. It's like you have to look at LDL, HDL. So the Framingham risk calculator is a really famous risk calculator, right? And it asks for your blood pressure. It asks, do you smoke? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It asks what your total cholesterol is. It asks what your HDL is. So it's asking also what your LDL is, I think. And then it gives you like a risk score. And even if you have an LDL of 300, but your HDL is high, your triglycerides are low, you have low blood pressure or normal blood pressure, you don't smoke, I think it came back as a risk of like a 5% heart disease risk. That and that doesn't align with what we're taught, right? With like the scare tactics around what high LDL does for you. And if you were asked to ask me, like, is a 5% risk of heart disease, worth the trade-off for these other things, right? Because when I don't have very high LDL. It's a little high. It's a little high. It's like 110, 105. But it's not high. I don't think of that as high, but like according to the charts, right? It should be under 99. But if I were to trade if I went back to having higher blood pressure, but lower LDL, my heart disease risk would go up. My heart attack risk would go up, right? If I went to having more body fat and higher LDL, risk up with the risk, right? So all these things were like, well, how big a risk is it? I think we've stopped looking at it in a larger context. And so I just think, and it's not even agreed on with everybody how much of a risk the LDL is. But if we just even look at like, population data and make an assumption that it is part of the risk profile, is not the biggest one. So I think that's a really important point that I think people aren't really looking at. And by people, I mean doctors, when they look at your blood work. And I think that is something really important that we should all like not we're not, we are our blood work is part of our diagnostic criteria. It is not all of who we are. But it was really interesting to read more about Eisenhower's heart attack and what they did with him, and it's, like, so different. It kinda makes sense, right? So when at the time period when Eisenhower had his heart attack in 1955, if you had a heart attack, you were, like, more likely than not to die. It was, like, I think 60%. But reading, like, he had the heart attack, like, while golfing. He thought it was indigestion. That evening, his doctor gave him morphine because he didn't like, he just was in a lot of pain. Then the next it was, like, not, like, for, like, almost 24 hours that he actually went to the doctor, to the hospital and found out that he actually had a heart attack. Like, it was like this like, can you imagine? I mean, most people did die then because nobody took it very seriously. Now it's taken super seriously. There's people do CPR. You have an immediate intervention. They tell you to get to the hospital right now. Um, and now so now like less than 10% of people die from heart attack issues. There were quite a few heart attacks back then, Paolo, more than there are now in 1955. So it's just that the treatment was not as likely. So yeah, there was a pretty high incident back then. It's just that they didn't really know as much what to do about them. But they were definitely happening. And so, one of the things that probably was contributing. Yeah, Paolo, they had quite a few of them. They just didn't know what to do with them. They thought bed rest. They thought bed rest was the thing to do. So if you had a heart attack, just don't exert yourself for a while. Yeah, Paolo, you're thinking way back. But this was, in the 1950s, there was a lot of drinking and smoking happening, right? And so one of the risk factors of a heart attack is smoking. And the population was smoking a lot during that time. And so, yeah, there was quite a few heart attacks in the 50s. Prior to sort of the era of one of the things you can look at that happened was up until the 1920s, the thing that was going to kill people was the fact they were going to get an infection or have an accident, right? It wasn't until really antibiotics came into being and like we understood that there were such things as viruses and germs and syphilis, things like that, that we could then treat. Once that happened, then that's when heart disease kind of emerged. And it wasn't so much that we had more heart disease at that point initially. At first, it was just that, if we have two causes and, infection and the like was really causing, and then it came down under, and then heart disease was now number one. It wasn't that heart disease climbed, right? But then, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it did start to climb a bit, but it was still, it was much deadlier than it is now. So anyway, so hopefully that makes some sense. I will explain it better in a book form. But yeah, drinking, smoking, and stress and that kind of thing really was a leading factor there. So yeah, so mostly the death, and it's sort of breast cancer is a similar story, right? Breast cancer was a huge boogeyman for a long time because it was a pretty deadly thing to get diagnosed with breast cancer. Now it's not. I mean, I'm not suggesting we want to be diagnosed with any of these conditions, but treatment has gotten much better for these illnesses. Hospitals have gotten better at helping. Diagnostics have been gotten better at catching things sooner. And so, when you pile those things on, we are much like, I think the American medical peoples are great at dealing with acute problems. Break a bone, have a cyst, have a heart attack, have breast cancer, like all these things. We're great at treating things. We're not great at preventing things, right? And so that's what I'm trying to work on in the world. But lots less people die of things now than they used to die of those things. We have other things that are now killing us, like diabetes. But yeah, the like intervention when you have like short term, not like preventing the heart disease, but like except for the smoking that we did figure that one out. But anyway, so Yeah, but in terms of like, one of the things I think we often get very confused in the medical world is um cardiovascular disease and your cholesterol levels are not synonymous, right? Uh, I think it often is so easy to distill these things down to just this portion, maybe a portion, maybe not of what makes up your overall risk factor. So even if I were like, I am 100% going to believe everything the mainstream tells me about heart disease, if I actually looked into it, not what they tell me, but what the data shows, right? I would say, well, it's a portion of the pie chart. It's not the whole pie chart. It's not even the majority of the pie chart. So, let's put some things in perspective. I think there's a lot of fear mongering around LDL, and I don't know that that's played out in any of the literature. And so, yeah. Anyway, so those are just some things that I've been thinking about, doing stuff about, writing about. Anyway, any other questions? Jack says, interesting to hear this. Well, good. I'm glad. I have not found a book that I find as fascinating about heart disease as I've found about estrogen. But, anyway, I was having a talk with my mom when I was started reading this book. And she's like, well, she said she remembered back in that time when I was a teenager and she was going through menopause, that she felt like she had to make a decision between increasing her chances of breast cancer and decreasing her hot flashes, right? She felt like that was the choice. She didn't understand that menopause isn't just having hot flashes. That's all she really knew about. And it's a lot more than that, right? That's an outward symptom. And she said, I placed my bet on not wanting to get breast cancer. And ultimately what it's been proved, and that Women's Health Initiative is actually come out now and said, no, we recant those things we said. It does not increase your risk of breast cancer. It actually reduces it. And so, yeah. And Jack, yeah, menopause is so much more. It increases your risk of heart disease. Hello. It increases it increases your risk of osteoporosis, increases your risk of muscle loss. It's all sorts of things. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of estrogen replacement therapy in conjunction with other therapies that you also need. Like if you have a uterus, you need progesterone, things like that. All right. Karen says, have you heard about castor oil for your skin? I've tried beef tallow and it made me itchy. I remember way back in the day hearing about castor oil for your skin. I haven't heard much about it of late. I seem to remember it being a good thing. If you don't tolerate beef tallow, then I would try it. I don't think there's a problem. I don't know anything about it. So I'm just saying that off the top of my head, I can't think of a downside. Also, really, I can't think of a downside to most kinds of fat you might apply to your skin and see if they make you feel good, like coconut oil, even like olive oil, although you smell like olives. I think any of those things are probably pretty skin appropriate, and I wouldn't be super worried about applying them to my skin. Yeah. All right. What else? Thinking. Yeah. Oh, I seem to have hit a little bit of a stall in my weight loss progress the past 3 weeks or so. Just keeping you guys updated. I'm trying to work with my brain because my brain wants me to be depressed. Well, like, you should feel bad about this. So I've lost a little over 10 pounds of the 18 I wanted to lose. Let's round that to 20. And the past month, it's just been ho hum here. And so, thank you, Pella. I, you know how it goes. Like, I'm like, years ago, I would have been ecstatic at the idea of weighing what I currently weigh. It would have seemed like an impossible dream. And so now I'm like, please don't nickel and dime yourself into a depression that's going to make everything in your life awful, because you are not just your weight. Your weight is the least interesting thing about you. And so I have to have those talks with myself, right? That I would have with my clients. I have them with myself because I am never satisfied. I will be honest. I never think I'm good enough, right? Right? Younger daughter syndrome, older daughter syndrome, girl syndrome, boy syndrome, human syndrome, right? We all have it. Nancy says, I like to mix castor oil with almond oil. Ooh, and a few drops of essential oil. Don't pull a Tammy. Oh no, Tammy, what'd you do? Uh-oh. I hope you're doing good, Tammy. Kathy, would you recommend a CGM if I'm asked to do a GGT? So a GGT, a glucose tolerance test. Well, you're going to fail the glucose tolerance test if you don't do some things. Okay, good. Good, Tammy. Good, good, good. Oh, you mean a before Tammy? Like a Tammy before. I got it. I got it. So would I recommend a CGM if I'm asked to do, okay. So what I would say to that is, I get like a squirrel. I get so distracted. I would ask to do a CGM instead. Why would I ask to do a CGM instead? I feel like you can pull some more useful information out of that. I would, I'm wondering why you're asked to do a glucose tolerance test, if you're pregnant, maybe, or if there was another reason. But I would say that some medical, so like one thing I know from hearing from a friend was there's some hospitals that say, like, if you're pregnant, I don't know what your story is, but if you're pregnant, they only will let you deliver in that hospital if you had a GGT, right? And if you're like, look, it's a hoop I just have to jump through, it might not be worth the fight, right? And then I'm like, okay, well, I'll do one, but here are my circumstances. Then we do what do we do if we have to take an oral glucose tolerance test, right? I'll put that aside for now. If you can talk to your doctor, if it's just your doctor that's asking for one, I would try to reason with your doctor and say, let's do this instead. And then you can sign off that I don't need it. And if that's possible, I would request it. Paolo has mentioned you could do a glycated albumin. So glycated albumin is going to tell them what your average glucose has been in like, I think it's 3 weeks, 2 weeks. It's like a similar, it'll give similar kind of results to like an A1C, but shorter time period. And less affected by certain red blood cell lifespan issues than an A1C. But the CGM, you might get some useful data out of that. So that might be useful. Now, if you can't avoid taking an oral glucose tolerance test, they are going to give you a pretty hefty dose of that glucose. In almost anyone, you can recover from that. It tastes terrible, apparently. I don't think it's going to send anyone off into the stratosphere of wanting to drink the glucola because it tastes terrible. But I would say that what I would do is you need to transition yourself from a fat furnace to being able to tolerate a few more carbs before the glucose tolerance test, or your body will overreact. Why does your body overreact to an oral glucose tolerance test if you've been keto for a while? Let me tell you. So, okay, got it. You're not pregnant. Excellent. So I would definitely at that point get a CGM. What I would look at there is you're going to look at, so the reason that you will fail it if you've been keto for a while is basal insulin levels will adjust to the amount of carbs it's used to your body eating. So, if you're low carb for long periods of time, your your insulin may be like 2, right? Maybe very low. And what is that? That's reflecting that you don't need much insulin because you don't eat a lot of things that require your insulin to go up, right? To take care of higher glucose. And so basically, I look at it like you are a factory. And they're like, we're not getting very many orders in right now. And so we don't need the like overtime staff of workers. Insulin is the staff in this case, right? So we're going to be on like holiday hours. We only have a couple of employees here right now because we're just not getting that many orders. Then it's like if you had a bunch of glucose, if you had a bunch of carbs, all of a sudden it's like Christmas orders came in while you're short staffed. And all of a sudden it's like it's like that Lucille Ball, the I Love Lucy episode where like the chocolates are coming in and they're like the conveyor belt is exploding with the chocolates all over because like the orders are coming in so fast. You can't, your body, like the workers aren't there to deal with the packages, right? That's what will happen if you take an oral glucose tolerance test while keto. So what you got to do is ramp up your carbohydrates to ramp up your insulin production for a couple of days. It's not very long. Your body will get the message pretty quickly that it needs more workers on the line, on the assembly line. So they usually say like 3 days of having around 150 grams of carbs is probably enough to kind of take your insulin out of the sleeper cycle and bring it back into kind of like activated cycle. And then you could do the glucose tolerance test and then you could go back to keto. So that would be, if you have to take it, that would be my advice. If you don't have to take it, I would get a CGM. Because my guess is what your doctor is trying to see is if you are experiencing hypoglycemia, experiencing periods where your blood sugar is like dropping off a cliff, right? And that can often bring about that lightheadedness. And so if you were wearing a CGM, and this is how you could sell it to your doctor, is you can like live your life and check your glucose compared to your symptoms. So you can have real life examples of, I felt lightheaded, I checked my glucose. I mean, you could do this with a glucometer too, but it's when you're lightheaded, that might be a little too much to deal with, right? I got lightheaded. I checked what my glucose was at the time because it's being monitored all the time. And it wasn't dropping. It wasn't low. It was totally normal. So you can then eliminate the glucose issue, the hypoglycemia issue from the lightheadedness, which then leaves you with what the heck is causing this lightheadedness. And then I'd look, definitely look at things like POTS, postural alignment syndrome, something temporal. I don't remember what the T is for, but it's basically like you feel okay, you stand up, and then you feel woozy, and that's affecting your blood pressure. And so some people have that, and it's a thing, and it exists. So that causes lightheadedness, and some people passing out, right? So I would look at other things then. So if I were your doctor, I would sell it. If I were you, I would sell it to your doctor. Like, look, I want to like see multiple events and compare it to my glucose at that time. And then I can see if it's actually my glucose, I'm having low glucose preceding these events causing the lightheadedness. And I can bring that data back to you with 2 weeks of data, which I feel like is actually much better than one experience of taking the Glucola. Do I think there's any real harm in oral glucose tolerance test for most people? Probably not. It's a limited scope issue. It's not suggesting it's a healthy way to live, but if there's a strong reason to do it, I'm not like never do it. But I would think in this case that there is a real selling point around a CGM. Back to Tammy. Tammy says, Tammy, I do remember your struggles for sure. I will say that HRT has been a huge difference in my mental and metabolic growth. Yes. That's another thing. There's enormous evidence that people in menopause have wild increases in, or not just menopause, perimenopause, which is the 10 years before menopause. So your 40s and your 50s, basically. Some people, they're late 30s. Enormous effects on our mental health. anxiety and depression go through the roof for some people. And so it's not just a hot flash issue, for sure, for sure. All right. Oh, good, Kathy. I hope that was helpful. And if you want to test your glucose, if your doctor's like, nah, you could get a glucometer if you don't already have one. At those don't require a prescription. It's just the little finger prick tests, right? You can get them at any pharmacy. That isn't a teeny one, right? And you could be checking your glucose like when you have a lightheaded event. If you're like still feeling well enough, you could check your glucose. You can start looking at that. You can start tracking your glucose through the day, and do that for a couple of days. And that might be valuable enough as well. So that's an option that requires neither a prescription nor your doctor's help to make happen. So you could go in with that data, even to say, look, I was tracking it on my glucometer. This is what I saw. I think if you kind of, again, part of that, like selling the CGM prescription, I think with a CGM, I could actually, make this even more robust in terms of data. And that would be, I think, useful for a discussion with your doctor for sure. All right, guys, what are you guys making for dinner? I'm going to make my spinach pie, which I really enjoy. It's a very kind of high protein, low carb pie. Postural. Yes, the POTS. Postural. Did I say? I think I said postural. Postural orthostatic tension? Something. I think that might be it. Anyway. Yeah, but I'm going to make so it's basically, I put in the food processor a container of cottage cheese. Good culture cottage cheese is always the way to go. And you spin it until it's like ricotta. And then I add eggs to it, some extra egg whites for a little more protein. And then that kind of forms the like batter that I've got. And I defrost a giant bag of frozen spinach. Sometimes, if I want a little more volume, but I'm not as worried about a few extra carbs to that batter of the eggs and cheese, I would add some like riced cauliflower to give it a little more volume. Optional. And then I put that in a Pyrex, like casserole dish. And then I add and some onion powder, garlic powder, salt, right? Although the cottage cheese is pretty salty, so I kind of moderate that. I defrost and wring out a bag of frozen spinach and maybe season that a little bit as well. And then I put that in the casserole dish, kind of distribute it around so it's everywhere. And I also put in some cheese, either like a Gruyere, Swiss, or you could do mozzarella. If you wanted a little more Greek, you could add a little feta. You could add a little feta for flavoring if you want. You can take it in different directions. You could add other vegetables if you want to, but that's super simple and it's like great amount of protein. It's a good choice if you have vegetarians in your life because it doesn't actually have any meat, but it has a high protein amount. There can't be dairy free though, because it has plenty of dairy in it. And I think it's a delicious dinner, lunch, whatever. You can have a smaller portion of it as a side dish. You could have a bigger portion of it as your main dinner. I just think it's hard to beat. Some people have already had dinner, ribeye with carrots and green beans. Sounds delicious. Tammy says cheeseburger casserole, beef, eggs, cheese, and seasoning. Great. That is a stock meal for sure. That is something to make all the time. All right, guys, I really appreciate you joining me for the hour. And I hope to have more information to share with you, more questions to answer next week. So take care, everybody. Have a fabulous night, and I will talk to you soon.